Aaron Woods, Julie from Rockland, Darren, the Aroostook County Emergency Management Agency, Travis Byfield from Byfield Lobster Company in Stonington, and Fire Chief John Gilroy from Old Orchard Beach. We happen to have had the chief at our first public meeting that the commission went to see on our first field trip and hear about the amazing recovery that he led for the municipality of Old Orchard Beach. So today is a milestone in our work. We're releasing the interim report, as you've all heard. And as Linda and I have said from the beginning, this work is urgent and important. We've all risen to the urgency. Delivering a set of recommendations in just 6 months, including actions to help Maine prepare for the winter storms, which undoubtedly are probably just on our doorstep. The interim report is intended to help the governor and the state take critical first steps in making the long-term policy and infrastructure investment decisions that are needed to help us defend against severe weather in the future. It's a long game, as we've said before, but we've all also recognized that there are critical immediate steps that can be taken as we design what is the final approach for the future. Our work is not done. We have the next 6 months to continue learning and to refine our recommendations and support the implementation as it happens. One of the things we've heard from a number of people, including the press today, was wanting to know, well, what's it going to cost? And I think our answer is this is a much bigger and a much longer term project than just sort of identifying a cost. We don't even have a project yet. This is going to be probably hundreds, if not thousands of projects. The one thing we did say, and undoubtedly will be in the press when it comes out either later today or tomorrow, is that part of our discovery has been that for every dollar invested in resiliency offsets $13 worth of ultimate damage in the future. And that's a number that's a national number from the Chamber of Commerce. So today we take a moment to reflect on the work so far and to turn our view on the work ahead. So I'm going to now pass it on to my co-chair, Linda, to kick off her reflection and the discussion for today.
Thanks, Dan. And hello, everybody. Welcome. It's great to see all your faces again and be in real time with you in the same room. The engagement of this group of people has been really, really heartening. And it's an answer in part to one of the questions that I was asked by the press after the official press meeting. So why are you doing this? And I was like, really? You're asking me that after we just went through all the scenarios and we toured the basement that was flooded and we did the whole thing? But one of the reasons we're doing this, right, is because we need everybody in this room, we need everybody in the state to be on the same page and to be working for the same goals. And that's what's been so terrific about having you all engaged with this process, is because if we don't work together, we're not going to achieve these, because these are, as Dan said, these are big long-term goals. I don't know how many of you have either directed or owned your own business in the room, but this is what's called capital planning, right? This is planning for the future and not just for the immediate. So it's not just the operating budget, it's your capital budget. It's a plan. So today we're going to start with a summary of that plan, of the recommendations contained in that plan. As you all know well by now, I hope, there are 12 recommendation sets, but as Dan said, there are no plans yet behind those recommendations, and so there are no costs yet associated with those recommendations. One of the things we want to do after we review the recommendations again, because these recommendations are going to be kind of like mission statements for us, right? We want everybody on the commission to be able to know these recommendations, to be able to respond when people are asking us about them, and to be able to push forward with the same 12 priorities that our work has turned up and that we have agreed upon. So we'll start with that summary again. It's going to help us all to hear them again and to think through them one more time. And then we're really lucky to have our panelists. 2 of them are commission members. It's going to be great to hear from you all. The panel discussions, which is a first responses to the report, right, to the recommendations, will be town officials and business owners, including, as I said, 2 of our commission members. So this is going to give us a real sense of first reactions to the report and the considerations that we might need to know as we move forward into the next phase of our work. So following that panel, we're going to hear from each of you about your first reactions to the report. Hopefully you got your copies. Did everybody get a copy of the report?
They got it in their email boxes. We'll have pretty ones for you in a couple weeks.
Okay. And what success looks like. As Dan and I have said repeatedly, we're looking for actionable and we're looking for things that will help for this year as we head into storm season, right? We don't want to leave our towns of Jay or Stonington or any of the towns represented around the table hanging when similar storms come again this very year. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Dan to start the overview of our recommendation.
Thanks, Linda. So as commission members, we are familiar with these recommendations because they've been shaped by us over the course of the last several months. For our guest panelists who just got a glimpse a few days ago, or for those just turning into the commission for the first time today, Linda and I are going to briefly review the recommendations. This is guided by the old adage that I think we were talking about this at lunch. That we don't want to redefine insanity as being doing the same thing over and over and over again, hoping for a new result. And in a way, that has been not just Maine's, but the nation's response to severe weather is, you get a wipeout, get a problem, you rebuild, perhaps you put the same culvert in again, and you put the same culvert in again, or you repair a foundation the same way, or in the working waterfront, you just repair your work the same way it was, and then it's really thinking about how do we do things differently to achieve the outcome that we really want to achieve. And it's been relatively easy for us to define what the outcome is. It's the path by which we want to proceed to deliver that outcome. So of our 12 recommendations, they're divided into 3 categories. 3 immediate actions to improve storm response, 6 medium-term actions to cement the foundation for resiliency, intentional word there, cement, and 3 actions that integrate resilience for the long term. As we have stated, for the best results, Maine should begin implementing actions from all 3 categories simultaneously. You'll see on the slides that the recommendations are accompanied by examples of implementation and quotes that help illustrate the need for action. So we're just going to, for the sake of expediency, we're going to read them to you. The first 3 actions, our immediate action are to enhance communications during and immediately after emergencies. We heard a lot from communities about capacity and about, having to rely on the news radio weather to figure out what is really in front of them. And that there was great confusion because there were all sorts of channels of information. So enhanced communication during the immediate and immediately following the event, strengthen coordination and rapid reaction capabilities with philanthropic and not-for-profit sector to alleviate immediate post-disaster needs. We realize that there has been a great outpouring, not just from grants from the federal government and grants from the state, which were so generously made available by the governor, but also that there's a huge capacity within the private world to help communities respond. And we recommend figuring out how to tap into that really quickly. And then lastly, expedite state permitting for post-disaster rebuilding. Speed to recovery is incredibly important, especially for those people that are operating businesses. The iconic example of that is the lobster industry, which, you know, they don't have the time to wait for a process. The lobsters come and they have to be fishing them. And if they don't have any kind of facility to fish them from or to land them to, that they then suffer dramatically more economic loss than they do by just having to repair their wharfs or their fish houses or their freezers. So really understanding where the log jams are, acknowledging some of the great work that's been done by state agencies to get things going faster. And then identifying where you even can be done better, because sometimes the time frame of the private sector trying to recover and the public sector, as good as it is, don't necessarily align. Linda?
Thanks, Dan. So I get the medium term recommendations here. So all of you who are runners or of any sort, now you're in the midterm piece of this. So it's where our perseverance comes in, because these actions need to start now, just like the shorter term actions. They just will take longer to implement, right? It's a longer term process. We have to persevere. We have to go the course if we want to achieve some of these, to really cement a foundation. So our fourth recommendation is to improve data and information sharing to help leaders, everybody in this room and beyond, make informed decisions about risk. So I want to give a shout out here to our consultant, Sam Brody, who's been amazing at talking about how we can improve our data and our information sharing. And those of us who live in the far-flung reaches of the state know how important information sharing is and also how difficult it can be. When you live on an island, you feel like you live on an island. Okay, enough said. Number 5, identify and strengthen critical vulnerable infrastructure. So the identify part is key here. What is vulnerable? Why is it vulnerable? What level of vulnerability does it have? How do we prioritize it so that we know what to do with it? So there's a lot wrapped up in that question, much of which is related to the improved data about the infrastructure itself. Assisting communities to reduce risk and proactively prepare for disasters. One of the things we know is that Maine has a lot of communities. We also know that a lot of them are far from each other and are very small. My own town is 1,000 people. So to reduce risk and actively, proactively prepare for disasters, who is going to do that work? Really? You know, I mean, who writes the grants? Who is gonna be thinking about this? Who has time for planning when you have, a staff of 3 and 2 of those are your town clerks that are collecting taxes and excise taxes? So we know, and we've seen examples from Vermont especially, of technical assistance that the state can provide and can add value to for our smallest communities. And by reducing the risk of our small communities and all of our communities, right, we reduce the risk for the state. So the state has a compelling interest in this. Recommendation number 7 is to maximize federal funding for disaster recovery and proactive resilience projects. Nobody likes to hear that we're leaving a lot of money on the table, but we're leaving a lot of money on the table. And that's because the state of Maine's capacity is similar to some of our small towns' capacity. We don't always have the capacity as a state to go out and get the money that is sitting there and possibly waiting for us. And hopefully will continue to be there. But we have to go after that funding, anything that we're eligible for. We have to figure out how we have the capacity to do that, to bring it down to our local communities. Recommendation number 8, improve and protect energy infrastructure and increase energy resilience for customers. It's our 8th recommendation. it's most people's number one issue. Because the vulnerability of our grid affects everybody. It affects our ability to be warm, especially as we urge further electrification, which we're doing in order to have better climate resilience. So one of these things feeds another, right? If we want further electrification, we already have a grid that is not resilient, that can't deal with our current needs. And that people really consider one of their number one issues in terms of climate change and in terms of how they can be resilient in their own homes. We've got to work with our energy infrastructure and increase that energy resilience for customers. And then number 9, the final of the foundation for resilience in our midterm goals, review state and local regulatory processes for opportunities to advance resilience and efficient post-disaster rebuilding. You know, ordinances pile up. They pile one on top of each other, they layer. And then all of a sudden you're under a tangle of things that were actually meant to take care of problems 20 years ago. Yes, I do speak from experience. And so reviewing ordinances and reviewing them with an eye toward what will make us more resilient and try to limit the amount of red tape and limit the kind of time that it might take to get help or the time it will take to rebuild. It's not just the state. It's not just the DEP. It's not the people permitting at the state level. It's our local communities as well. And with that, we'll move into the final phase of recommendations here.
Thanks, thank you, Linda. You know, this is very serious work, but occasionally you have to bring a little bit of sort of levity to it. And I chuckled when you said when you live on an island, you want to feel like you live on an island. But after, in the state of Maine, after a severe weather event, when you live on the mainland, you don't want to feel like you live on an island. Which unfortunately we heard from a number of communities was sort of the primary impact of the moments after the storm. So we want to prevent those unfortunate occurrences in the future. So as I've said to many people, there will be projects in the short term, but this is really the long game. When we've talked to our outside consultants, one of the things that we've been reminded of is that we today are solving for something that we haven't yet even completely understood, you know. So I've been asked since I took on this commission, you know, responsibility, okay, well, how high should we build our wharf? And the answer is, I don't know, you know.
Hi.
We're high, but, you know, so there's a lot of what we are doing today that will require us to be able to pivot as we learn more and as the future becomes more obvious to us. So the long term really gives us sort of that vision and the opportunity to think about the long game, and to take the experiences we're living through in the short term, synthesize them, and then perhaps pivot as we need to pivot. So the last 3 recommendations in the report are build long-term analytical capabilities for understanding and communicating the risk. That's just, okay, today we think we know what the risk is. I can tell you, and we've mentioned this before, everybody in the Carolinas and on the coast of Florida thought they understood the risk. They thought, oh, there could, you know, we had 3 storms back to back, but we didn't have 3 devastating hurricanes. Within 3 months, they had 3 devastating hurricanes in the South, and that was never in anybody's plan book. So we have to be able to take information, you know, on an immediate basis and figure out how we pivot around that. We need to develop funding and financing strategies for long-term resilience needs. There will need to be a lot of creativity built into that. There is not a single state in any country, in any state in the United States where on an annual basis, a governor, be they a red state or a blue state, will be able to put a financing plan together in a state budget and will take care of the problem. This is a long, you know, systematic acknowledgement that that resiliency has to be a part of the future for the next 100 years or more of every state. And then explore options for building and infrastructures to become more resilient in the future. You know, think, as Linda said, think about, okay, well, a lot of the rules we operate under today were created to solve problems of 50 years ago, perhaps. And stepping above that and really thinking about, okay, well, what are the compelling things we need to solve for in the future, and unburden ourselves perhaps for some of the things we were trying to solve from the past. We'll have the opportunity to build upon these recommendations in the months ahead. But we wanted to take a little bit of time today to learn how we might do that. And in order to do that, we've invited a guest panel to share their first impressions to the report. I'm going to actually hand it over to Hannah, who's going to have a few moments, and then we're going to hear from Linda.
Okay, great. Actually, the only thing my little role in this is actually just to remind folks, is what we talked about just now in Hallowell, about this $7 million that was passed by the state legislature and is now in the process of being implemented. And I'm actually sitting right next to Bruce Van Note, who he and Joyce Taylor over there and their whole agency worked to implement this $25 million grant program to help communities invest in infrastructure long-term to do exactly the kinds of things that we've been talking about. We've also been joined by Commissioner Kelleher, who's sitting next to Kurt, and whose agency has helped to lead with DOT nearly $25 million in investments in Maine's working waterfront. And then we heard from Commissioner Johnson about the $10 million program for small businesses. And I highlight these because I know you've all heard about it from this commission repeatedly, but these projects are now, these dollars were made available legally to the state in August when the budget went into effect, and they're now just starting to be implemented. Maybe some of those working waterfronts are reimbursements, but everything else, these projects are happening. And I think there's an opportunity in the next 6 months for this commission to kind of learn from these programs, to see in more detail what was funded. We spent a lot of time talking about how do you build back more resiliently, and the lessons we're learning on the working waterfront side, for example, will be really helpful. And I know we're going to hear from some of the folks who received these grants. So I think this is just a good lead in to remind us that a significant amount of money, at least for the state of Maine, was invested. I think as Dan and Linda have both said, well, this is probably the tip of the iceberg of the kinds of funds that will be needed to do the projects needed for the long term. But I just want to again remind us that this is a learning opportunity to watch these funds over the next couple of years as these projects happen.
Thank you, Hannah. So we've got 12 recommendations, a set of 12, and we've invited 6 panelists to share their first impressions with us. And first impressions are really super important because often they're the most real and the most realistic impressions before we take time to think about what might be politic or not politic to say. So we've got 3 of our panelists in the room. We've got 3 of our panelists online. The panelists today really represent so many of the communities that we traveled to that were impacted by the storms and floods over the last 2 years. We met dozens of people like this, local officials and business owners who shared their experiences and their challenges with us. We had people in tears. They had us in tears. It's been tough. It's been really tough when you can't get to a part of your town, when you can't get the power on for days and days and days, when you don't know what to tell your homeowners. So we've invited these folks to join us today. And 2 of these are our commission members. I'm going to start with Shiloh Lafreniere. She's our commission member and the town manager of Jay. Sitting next to her is Jim Merton, commission member and owner of North Country Rivers. Next to Jim is Julie Hashem, the community development director for the city of Rockland. And online, we've got Darren Woods. He's the director of the Aroostook County Emergency Management Agency. My colleague Travis Fifield, who's a Stonington selectman and owner of Fifield Lobster Company, and Chief John Gilboy of the Old Orchard Beach Fire Department are all online. Thank you so much to each of you for joining us today. We realize You've only had a couple of days to absorb these recommendations. You haven't been having them drilled into you as we develop them like the rest of the commission members. So we appreciate you sharing your first impressions. I have 3 questions basically, and you don't all have to answer, but I want to make sure that the people on screen get a chance to answer too. So if the team will help me see if John and Travis and Darren, and if you guys could turn your cameras on at this point, it would be awesome, I think. Make sure that they get their voices heard as well. The very first thing we're gonna ask to everybody is, how do these recommendations address the concerns and issues in your community? And we'll start with somebody in the room. Let's start with Julie. She gave us a great tour while she was on vacation, I believe, in the city of Rockland, the waterfront there. Julie, thanks for doing that, and thanks for being with us today. So how do these recommendations address the concerns and issues in your community?
Happy to be here and thank you for asking. First, I want to say we're just really grateful for the work of this commission and for the governor's leadership on this, recognizing how important public infrastructure is to our local and regional economies. And it's really going to take all of us to make a difference and moving us toward resilience. First impression, I'd say the report does really well in creating a high level framework that resilience is really going to depend on avoiding damage with mitigation, effectively managing events when they occur, and when the worst happens and we have to building back in a way that our infrastructure is stronger and more resilient for the next storm that comes along. That said, the report, even though you haven't done the planning behind your vision yet or all the details, there are some very practical things that are important to communities that you've already identified, like we can't get insurance for some of our most at-risk infrastructure. So thank you for noting that and thinking about ways to address it. For my particular community, I'd say our biggest issue is finding funding. We've identified a wide range of projects, redeveloping our downtown waterfront at a higher elevation. That was the tour, but also a wide range of stormwater and water separation projects, and finding funding for those is a really big challenge. And the focus in your recommendations 6 and 7 on those things, very much appreciated, and we'll be looking forward to seeing where you go with that.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate those thoughts. Let's go to somebody on the screen here. I see that John, Darren, and Travis have all turned their cameras on. Thank you, gentlemen. John, which one of you would like to answer this question about how these recommendations address the concerns and issues in your community? Do I have any volunteers? Did I see John's hand? John.
Good afternoon. One of the things I was glad to see is that there was a big section devoted to communication. Not only communicating the hazards to the people that live in town, but also maybe to be able to answer a question that I fielded quite often was, how do we keep this from happening again? And that was a big thing. And then the other thing was to somehow develop a platform that keeps the residents in tune with what we're doing as department heads and as committees, because a lot of times the information doesn't flow back to them as quickly as it should. So they kind of wonder what we're doing. And we could be doing, 20 hours a day trying to, mitigate, funding through FEMA or MEMA, or trying to, get something in the works. And I think that takes a little longer. But my initial feeling was that you guys did a good job.
Thanks, John. So communications, funding, Shiloh, you want to jump in?
Sure. I think my kind of drum I've been beating the whole time is about the capacity, especially of the smaller communities and even the larger communities. Nobody's set up to deal with this. So I think that we've really hit a very broad way of hitting that capacity issue in the communication piece, in the data gathering piece. So when you're planning for the future, you know, is that data available? In the immediate, like permitting, if a incident happens, that permitting piece of it. So to me, that was my first impression, and my biggest one is that we're looking at this in so many different ways to be able to help with that capacity issue and how can we strengthen the municipalities. But I was very pleased with it.
It's great to hear, Shiloh. Thank you. Yeah, so communications funding capacity. Travis and Darren, either of you like to add anything here? Darren?
So my initial read through, as you said, I haven't really dived deep into it because I haven't had it very long, but I think it was well put together. I think you guys hit on a lot of good topics at the 30,000 foot level, which is really what you have to do with this kind of a thing. There are some things that I can see within it that we could do immediately, that is available to us now. Especially like, you know, when we talked about communications and use of, for example, the FEMA IPAWS system. There is ability for counties to do that now. It's just taking some time to get everybody on board, but it is a useful tool. I've used it in Heuristic a few times, and it has helped. If I'm looking at your 3 questions here that you've pre-sent me ahead of time, the additional focus, you know, when you talked about the flood issues and the resiliency there, I want to again reiterate how important it is for us to update these flood maps that our communities are having to rely on. I think somebody had stated it earlier. I'm sorry, I can't see the camera very well, but that some areas are having issues getting insurance that probably shouldn't, or the other way around, because the maps that we're relying on, in some cases in my county, the most up-to-date map we have is 1980. And so, you know, how do you plan with such old data when things have really changed? The other thing that I really wanted to make sure gets noted is the vulnerability in the electrical grid. That you mentioned that. It was really, I'm really happy to see that. Incredibly important as emergency managers. One of our biggest fears is a long-term power outage. Our counties are planning for that now. And the newest thing that we're all looking at is resiliency for these solar storms that are becoming more and more prevalent, that could take our grid down literally for months at a time. So we have to invest into this grid so we don't lose that life-saving capability of power for heat and everything else that we need.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Darren, for focusing on the grid. And also, I think everybody in the room will be heartened to hear that you find some of these recommendations to be actionable, because we have worked really hard to create actionable recommendations that people can take and run with, hopefully with their surrounding communities and regions. And so really happy to hear you say that in particular. And for taking us into the next question, but I just want to check with Travis and Jim to see if you guys would like to add anything about how these recommendations address the concerns and issues in your communities. Travis, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I kind of especially like the idea of the insurance for the infrastructure. I think that would be you know, a benefit to a lot of towns. I know it would have been to Stonington. Yeah, I mean, you know, first impressions, I think that I think the report was very comprehensive, and just like Darren was saying, you know, it touched on a lot of you know, I think on a lot of the sort of important issues that a lot of folks in town here were thinking about. Yeah, particularly and kind of in addition to the insurance, sort of the centralized kind of communication hub, kind of pulling all together, kind of the all of the disparate pieces of information, kind of that small towns can go to, I think would be very helpful, sort of in the moment and directly after these disasters.
Thanks, Travis. Jim, did you have any words you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a collection of individuals and ideas. I've enjoyed reading it and implementing some of it already. I think the communication is really important through the, cell phones. I think that would be awesome. I know EMS were out doing evacuations and literally get a phone call, a cell call when they're 3 or 4 feet of water, that the dam just went, and so that's really critical, the communication, and they've mentioned insurance a lot. It's very important for municipalities, but for private businesses, I mean, I spend almost $100,000 a year in insurance, and it wasn't anywhere near enough. So if there were secondary markets, if the state could get involved in that, or reinsurance, or something like that, I think that would be really critical. Also for small businesses, capital is very important, and especially that time of year. And so more, access to capital expeditiously, I think would be really important. Data is critically important, as brought up by Sam and other panelists here. I think we can take data from many disparate sources and integrate it into one and use some high-level algorithms and AI. I mean, I think that's out there. We can start working on that. You're looking at power companies that have their own sets of data and their own mechanisms, but of dealing with it. But could we bring more data in and collect it and then share that? And I think, basically, Brookfield tells me that they were given a miscalculation on the weather event, which is true. But how could we have reacted to that more quickly? Measured that? I think that's really important. So I think there's a lot of power in data and a lot of ways to analyze it. And a couple other points that I thought were important, not only measuring, the elevation volume of the watersheds, but, more river gauges in these secondary tributaries. I mean, they were telling me that there's 58,000 CFS. I said, no, USGS says 92. You're not measuring Austin Stream, 15,000. So nobody's fault. It's just, it was, a difficult situation. So any way you can better measure and manage the watersheds, the volume, the elevation, the flow, even satellites could be used for that. Maybe they are. I think that's important. One comment that I brought up kind of late was the watersheds themselves, the slopes are very steep. They've been cut over all the years through harvesting. Can we build some tax credits in there to replant those watersheds? And that's made a huge difference on the speed of runoff, I think. So if there's a way to do that and maybe incentivize it where, they could do replanting or more less intrusive harvesting methods, that would be a great idea. There's a lot more ideas out there, but we've been implementing. We've already, I took a hit of about $500,000 in losses. Insurance companies came through with about 35,000. I was fortunate to get an award from Department of Economic Development. I really appreciate that. That's made a difference for me, and I'm still open. I still have payroll. I still have operations going. So I do appreciate all the efforts that have been done by this commission and by the state legislature and the governor. I think they're moving forward really well. It's a huge task, but we're addressing it, we're attacking it, and we'll just learn from it as we move forward.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And that the impact of that $60 million, just can't be understated. And it was an unusual occurrence, right? I mean, I don't see, just like with our businesses and our wharves and, rebuilding every year. It's not like the governor is gonna be able to find $60 million every year to fill these gaps. This is the second great news story we've heard today about the DECD. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Jake, wherever you are, for filling the gap for some people, because we too have heard the stories about insurance and flood insurance in particular that covered less than 10% of the total cost of damage. So we have to really consider that when we're looking at the finances and at the funding piece, is that the insurance, the way it's currently set up, is funding only a very small part of this. And what helped businesses like gyms and Rich's earlier today down in downtown Hallowell get through was that extraordinary granting effort that actually closed the gap. So before we close up this discussion, what we need to know from you guys is what's missing, right? So Jim started to get down into like plans, like actionable plans that we can fund, that things we can do. But was there anything really missing in this report? What should the additional focus of the commission? The commission goes through May. We have another 6 months to finalize this report. So this is an interim report. So we have 6 more months to work on this and to make it really great and to make the recommendations include everything that we think that we need. So what additional focus should the commission have for its final report in May? And while you're thinking about that, just like what's important for the commission and the state to keep in mind as these recommendations start to be implemented? I think those two questions go together. So Darren.
Thank you. As I just can't overstate the importance of the electrical grid resiliency. But moving on from that, the gentleman in the front mentioned watershed and things like that, and it really kind of brought another issue to my mind in that our state's flood control dams are getting aged. The gates are that control them are starting to have issues, and the communities just don't have the funding available to properly repair or upgrade those dams. We've seen in other states just this year issues where dams have failed and flooded communities, and we certainly don't want to see that happen here in Maine.
Thank you, Darren. Anybody else? What are we missing, Jim?
Just have one other comment. Everything we've been really working with has been based on flooding and water-related issues. But right now, I've talked with the Brookfield managers, and they're telling me we're in a 3-month drought, and they're a little concerned. And so that's the other side of the equation here. Too much water, not enough, and a consequence of that could be wildfires. So I think that that's something you don't want to hear, I don't want to hear, but I think it's a real issue.
Absolutely. Thank you for adding that in as something we need to consider as we work the next 6 months. Julie?
In terms of what's missing, one thing that came to mind for me in talking with contractors, engineering firms, they're telling me that there's often a 2 to 3 year wait now for new clients or major projects. And I'm wondering if this commission has given any thought to workforce. Are there enough contractors to do the work we know needs doing and that we're all going to be busily trying to fund? And is there a targeted workforce attraction in those areas that might be helpful? The other thoughts that come to mind are maybe less what's missing and more what you might be thinking of as the action planning stage. I've been thinking about, how do we get projects to done? And how do we make sure that where the state invests in planning or engineering, that the state is working collaboratively with communities and others to actually get these projects funded as well? And would it be helpful to look at all of the resources and assistance across state government as a system and something that creates this pipeline of projects? And then how do you use the different programs to move things through the pipeline? And I'll give you an example. When the tour that we did of the downtown waterfront is thanks to the coastal program, that we were able to do visioning, and it's thanks to the community action grants from GoPIF that we were able to do engineering. And, you know, our biggest need now is, well, how are we gonna find the best fit for funding, and how are we gonna cover the required match? So is there a way to think systematically of how do you move not just our project, but everybody's project effectively through the pipeline, so that communities and others know when they put the effort into building community support and doing the resilient plans, that they won't be alone, you know, when the time comes to find the money. I think probably the last thing that comes to mind for me again is thank you. I really believe when people of goodwill come together and think about how do we make something happen, that we'll come up with ways to make things happen. And we've got probably close to $50 million worth of resilience projects just in Rockland. Right? The NOAA grant is a wonderful thing, and wow, do we need a lot, because that's our stormwater, right? And it's our waterfront and it's other things. And I don't think our community is alone. We just might be a little further along in some cases in identifying the projects.
Thanks, Julie, for bringing up those points, workforce, and especially kind of that overwhelming sense of like what the cost of all this might be. Travis, John, anything that you think we should be focused on for these next 6 months?
The only thing I can think of is, and it might be already in the report, is that we talk about, I guess the easiest solution is when the building's brand new. We know we can raise it up. We know we can get it out of the floodplain. But is there a solution for the existing homes? And I talk about my community here, especially in the Ocean Park area, that have been in families for hundreds of years. Is there a solution or plan to get them out of the water? You know, is it something that's even possible?
Yeah, good question. I think a lot of us have historic downtowns and historic buildings that we're wondering the same about. Travis, you want to jump in on that at all?
Yeah, well, I kind of reading through this, the thing that keeps popping into my head is sort of this idea of kind of incrementalism, like at these, you know, the amount of work, you know, that's going to need to be done, you know, on the town level, on the state level is just, is kind of incomprehensible to me. It's going to take a lot of money and a lot of effort, and it's going to take a lot of time. And you know, and in particular, I like the momentum, you know, of this commission, and I hope it keeps up, because I think we need to keep, you know, this momentum up, you know, for years, you know, like we were talking about, and particularly for small towns, you know, that are very sort of kind of resource and you know, labor limited at town hall, you know, just kind of having, you know, sort of a state agency or a group of people to kind of, you know, to kind of keep kind of moving it all forward, I think is going to be important, I think, because, you know, like I said, these things, doing all of this work is just such a huge task that I can see a lot of small towns and you know, the people that live there, you know, almost kind of hitting a wall, you know, in terms of you know, the need to keep going. So I don't really know what the answer is. It's just kind of, as I was reading through this report, you know, it's just something that kind of keeps popping into my head, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great, Travis. Thanks for emphasizing the sense of urgency and the sense for need for support for our small towns. Shiloh, you want to add anything?
I think kind of piggybacking on what Jim and Darren said, I think one of the things we heard in some of the listening sessions were about more than just the storms, and we've kind of focused on the storms. And then, like Linda, you said it earlier, the need to pivot if we do, you know, into looking at drought or wildfire, and whether that's something that the commission needs to look at in the near future or longer out, or whichever agency is tasked with, you know, doing any of these things. The idea that it's not just storms, it's bigger than that. It's the electric grid, it's the drought, the wildfire, we don't have power for warming places or cooling stations. You know, we've heard that in some of our things. So maybe keeping that in mind that, well, we need to be focused, we also need to be able to pivot when needed. And then again, just the idea that these are actionable. I think that's something in the next 6 months we really have to focus on and getting those projects, you know, so that they're defined things that we can actually do so that our time here has not been wasted. We're all moving forward. And I love what Travis said because it's true. This is a long game and we really need to be committed ourselves and then keeping people in these roles so that it keeps moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Shiloh. I mean, you and Travis and Julie have all emphasized, you know, the need to kind of not be alone in this, right? So the communications are key, the collaboration is key. We can't emphasize enough how in a small state with small communities, having us all on the same page and moving in the same direction is what's going to make us successful. Jim, do you want to close us out with any thoughts about what our focus should be over the next 6 months? What's important for us to keep in mind?
Well, communication is critical, just keeping things in a short, medium, and long-term perspective as far as developing plans going forward. Listening to each other, learning from each other, continuing to share ideas, get some feedback on our successes. And it's never going to end. It's going to be a very dynamic process. And just very important. And living in Maine, I love Maine. I love being here. We all do. And I think it'll contribute to a better future in Maine.
Thank you, Jim. You just brought up an important point, which is that short-term successes are things that can build momentum, things that we can celebrate. So I think we do want to look for a couple of those short-term successes that we can communicate and celebrate and build the momentum to keep going, to finish the long race, probably long after most of us are sitting at this table. Thanks to you all 6 of you, for your first impressions. That's not an easy thing to get a big old report in your email and have to go through it. And your impressions are really valuable. I'm going to turn it over to Dan to walk us through the commission's responses.
Thanks, Linda. Actually, I found this conversation incredibly important. And I'm going to go off script just for a moment and ask one other question that I'd like to maybe have the 6 panelists reflect on just briefly, and then perhaps the rest of the commission reflect as well. And that's one of the things that we kind of identified very early on, as early as our first meeting in Stonington, and then it was consistent across the board. And that's this notion of capacity. And the report is filled with discussion about capacity. But, as I think about what that word is, one of the complications is that I'm afraid one of the things we need to do is really define what capacity means. Because I think capacity, for a number of the reasons that we've just identified today, is a very different word if you're talking to the town of Rockland, as opposed to talking to the town of Whiting or Lubec, or, where, and one of the things we want to avoid is in this home rule state, which is very decentralized, which the majority of the municipalities, if they have anything other than a board of select people, might have an employee or two. This notion that, well, it's just another report that the state's doing. It's just another department that the state's created. It's another level of bureaucracy. And you know what? We're not going to get anything out of it. So it'll be the fortunate few municipalities that, have people like, like the chief or like Linda or Julie or others that, have worked doing what they're doing for at least some period of time that they understand. They may be frustrated with the level of things they have to go through, but at least they understand what has to be gone through. So I'd really love to hear just a little bit about, how you think, what you think we need to do to really have this embraced by, the 400 plus communities,
480 something.
480
Something.
something communities in the state of Maine. And work, because we really want to work hard to get them on board. And, what are the mechanisms that we can do that through, need to be embedded in our final report. So I'd just love to hear, if you have any quick reflections on that. And then we'll move on. Julie?
So I wonder if, as you get into action planning and thinking about the next level of the framework plan, if a systematic thinking about what barriers municipalities face might be helpful, because sometimes it's information and data, but sometimes it's having the capacity to even do something with that information and data. I mean, we don't think we have capacity. I can only imagine how the towns of 1,000 people with, 3 staff would feel. I think there are some things that you're already thinking about to increase capacity, and, this Office of Resilience is a marvelous idea, and trying to get, municipal assistance and support coordinated in a particular agency. Trying to build capacity at the COGS is helpful. I would say yes, and there's also, I think, need for help from the people with technical expertise at the state. Going after some of these federal grants really requires some specialized grant writing and knowledge that even those of us that are pretty good with grants don't have. When you think about barriers, sometimes the fear of the money gets in the way and what it will take, and it's easier to just pretend that the pier that's on its last legs maybe can last another 10 years and we'll get lucky. So if there could be a systematic look at barriers and also what are the ways to address those barriers, it might help build support across communities of all sizes. I mean, maybe there's a fund specifically for to help with match for federal grants, or maybe there's a team that provides assistance to people figuring out what federal grant is the best match, and should the community go after it or should the state? Maybe there's a way to aggregate projects across communities that are like projects where, the state and the communities could collaborate together on one shared proposal. I'm not sure what things are really practical, but I'd love to think about some of those things together.
Any other panelists before we go to the commission members?
Well, I like the way of helping municipalities with specialized, capable individuals. I think that's very important. That was just mentioned.
Chief Kilboy.
Okay, Chief?
Yeah, I was just thinking about your question, and I'm not even sure if it's even possible to somehow streamline, maybe streamline is not a very good word, the process. Because I can speak for Old Orchard and department heads, town manager, assistant town manager. If you want to talk about capacity, just compiling facts and figures and documentation and just the process of it all is just a really lengthy process. We had a project that began in December of 22. We're just now approaching the finish line on that project. I mean, so I'm not sure how to make it quicker and then still satisfy all the requirements, especially when we're dealing with FEMA, MEMA. A big resource for us here in town is York County EMA. I mean, we have questions, they have some expertise there. Maybe a list of resources that towns could access that would give them a hand in navigating all these things that we're trying to do, especially when you're trying to where we've had damage, what do we do to make it so we're not doing the same thing next year? And that one of our projects, it was a street, and one of that factors we did was a mitigation to do, build more onto the sides to hopefully not have that wash out again this year. So I mean, I guess that's, my thought process on that.
Well, you know, leave that question open for the next few minutes while we kind of ask some of the same questions of the commission. We would love to hear from commission members on their reflections of the report in the last 6 months. I will just remind you that when we met for the first time at our first meeting, some of your thoughts about what this should look like in its conclusion included pragmatic and actionable recommendations, feasible and creative ideas for funding, a sustainable and achievable roadmap, improving readiness for communities and individuals, listening and hearing communities and developing responsive actions, with listening and hearing to communities, and a plan to leverage state, federal, and private resources. Let's take the next 15 or 20 minutes, go around the room, hear from commission members. And also love to hear what success looks like in you know in the next 6 months for the commission, and I'll also just leave that last question open for commission members as well. So
Dan, I have before we get into that, I have a quick comment and a kind of a question for the group and also maybe for the panelists, and it might be really, really quick. There was a lot of focus on capacity and equity, and I'm wondering, I mean, the state has done a lot, I think, over the last few years in terms of focusing on those issues through our coastal community grants, shore harbor grants, coastal action grants, and all of the different funding mechanisms that are out there now in terms of trying to address those things. And it seems like that was a good model and has been improved immensely over what we had before. So I was just wondering if, with the formation of our new office from MOCA, the Office of
Community Affairs.
Thank you. MOCA, so
I'm glad you
that's,
remember MOCA.
that's also gonna help consolidate things. So I think we have a good model in place for getting at some of the issues. And I was wondering if the communities or the panelists had any feedback about that or improvements, that maybe we can hold that for a later discussion. But I think we've come a long way with the way we're trying to address equity and the way we're trying to address capacity by including regional service providers, RVOs, and things like that. So there's a good model in place, I guess is what I'm saying. We don't have to start from scratch. So comment more than anything else. Charlie?
So I have not read the report. It arrived too late for me to look at it this morning, but I will, and you will get comments.
we don't doubt that.
I want to pick up on the conversation that we just had, however. So in the next 6 months, hopefully, some of the things that we recommended, action will be taken on them. And I think our final report should be an evaluation of what has happened between the interim report and the final report. We should assess what's happened, look at what hasn't happened, and if we can be helpful to make it happen in the future, we should do so. Equally important, to jump ahead to the final recommendations, I'll just head right for that. And that is that this commission or something like it should be continued as a kind of permanent audit and oversight group on the resilience question, because it touches on so many different agencies in so many different places in state government that somebody like us, not necessarily us, needs to be on the lookout for it all the time as a resource to help make things happen and as an evaluator and checker of what is happening. So I would hope that at the end of the day, we can recommend that this external oversight of the state's efforts at resilience and climate adaptation be continued, not as a new agency, but simply as an external process to check on all the things that are happening. In that context, there was much discussion today about a capital plan, which should include a capital budget, by the way, which was very interesting to me because I started pushing for a capital plan and capital budget for state government with my colleague Lloyd Erlin in 1982. And here we are 42 years later saying, oh, we need a capital plan. I actually, the reasons to have it back then are the reasons we need to have it today. And you've heard all of those. But I think more importantly, the capital plan and the capital budget are a tangible manifestation of the commitment to resilience. That when you put something down on paper and you say, this is a budget, and this is what we're gonna spend, you have made a tangible commitment. The legislature may say, you know, forget it, but somebody has said, this is what needs to be done in the context of the overall trade-off. So I would hope that would be one of the things that we can come out of this with, in addition to everything else that we might say.
We want to go all the way around the room and give everybody a chance to talk. Want to start, do you want to start it and then?
Make Emily start. She
Emily,
looks over.
Emily, she had that look on her face.
Yeah.
I thought so.
So I kind of look at I'm a planner, and so to me, this is our comprehensive plan. And I agree with Charlie's point that we need an implementation committee to ensure that there is success. I also, your comments really spoke to me in terms of how we need to ensure that there's a way to get projects done. Because right now, I think a lot of communities do feel like they're floating on an island, including even the COGs and the RPOs. We want to ensure that we can get our communities to that point. And so a lot of what's put in this report is really helpful. I think the piece that we need to kind of figure out is that achievable roadmap? And how do we get the short-term goals done? How do we initiate the medium and long-term goals and then ensure their success? So I think we're at the 30,000 foot view and we need to take a closer look.
Quite good to have planners at the table.
So while I'm working as a planner at the state level right now, I spent many, many years at the regional level and have said multiple times to this group, so I'm saying it again, that, and I'll echo what Pete said, that it is especially for the towns, small, really rural, deeply rural towns. The regional councils are an essential contributor to capacity. Because I, having worked in Washington County for 17 years, I hear people say small and they say, I've only got 1,000 people, or we've only got 3 staff people. Well, they have none. They have 400 and less, 44 people or less with 1 part-time clerk. And that's very common in multiple parts of the state. So there's small and there's really small. So I just want to stress that. And I could not agree with you more, Charlie. We're talking about revising the growth management law right now, and there's conversations around inclusion of a capital investment plan. I think it is the most important thing, besides the future land use map, in a comprehensive plan, is to have a capital investment plan. And if we're requiring it of communities, we should require it of ourselves at the state level.
For me, I think, so I was at a presentation just last week down in York County, and I had the pleasure of being able to hear the president and CEO of the Lewiston, Auburn, Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, just give a brief talk, on preparedness, emergency preparedness. And capacity came up. It's been coming up for years. I don't think lack of capacity is unique to our circumstance in this commission. You know, it's just something that's plagued us for years. So the way she talked about it was really enlightening for me. And I don't think we've talked about it in this group because yes, we can own, there's a lack of capacity, but she addressed it as, yes, there's a lack of capacity. So then it comes down to prioritization. And so that's something we haven't really like discussed, and how do we market that in this plan? How do we work with our state officials, with our local officials to prioritize? And what's different now than used to be in the past is we never really saw things as big and bad as this in the past, but now we have actual case studies. So we can bring like Maine stories to the forefront with lessons learned and maybe use that as part of a like prioritization scheme. Because everyone's wearing a lot of hats. And so where does emergency preparedness come in? It's a big deal when it actually happens, but in the grand scheme of things, I think people tend to see it as lower risk until it happens. So I don't know how it works in, but I just thought that was like a unique perspective I've never heard from a leader before, that it really comes down to maybe not the capacity piece, but the prioritization piece.
Make sure Heather behind you there.
Oh, hey, the only thing that I might think about that's a little bit different than the discussion is, as we talk about capacity, I think we need to think about technology solving some of this capacity work. Because we're never, in my opinion, gonna have enough bodies to throw at it, and we're never gonna have enough money to throw at it, and so if there are ways for us to augment, you know, like we're working on developing a tool that matches grants with projects in our department right now. We've got some AI specialists that are working on helping us do that. And if we can do that and then be ready to release that out to communities to be able to use as well, right? There are ways for us to solve this instantly. I mean, if we ran this grant program, and there's been some talk about it, it was a great program, Jake did an awesome job. But with just a couple of tools, we could have saved months on how we executed that, right? So I think we need to be thinking differently about how we respond to some of this as well.
Well, I'm not a planner, I'm more of an implementer, so I'm an implementer at the table. And one of the things that I like about the report and the recommendations is, as you know, Linda, you've emphasized many times, there are things in here that I can see that are doable. And I tend to keep thinking of our work in the context of, you know, around Christmas time last year, when the state government, we were scrambling to figure out what on earth we were going to do to help people. And so I tend to look at this through that lens of, does this now tell me what we're going to be able to do to help people? And I think that there's a lot of that in there. But, you know, to Heather's point, I also don't believe we're ever going to have the capacity that we say that we need. You know, I mean, if we've been talking about capacity needs at the local level for decades, then why is it suddenly going to change? It's not, but maybe there are ways that we can change how we approach it that will meet our needs moving forward.
I would just add on to that, I think that, at least from the energy side, to kind of focus on data and analysis to help inform future decisions and future investments is really exciting. I think that, or is really important, so that we're kind of looking at what might have the, you know, the best value for some of the investments that need to be made. But I think bringing more transparency and understanding to the greater population, I think, is really important in this topic as well.
Right.
Refer to Bruce.
So I think the plan, I think we've done a really nice job of capturing the elements of what could be very successful. I think as we get into the next piece of this exercise, I think we thought that was tough. The next piece is gonna be tougher. And you're gonna have to make decisions about capacity, the requirements, decision-making. And how do we bring more efficiency into execution of whatever ideas that we want to move forward. And I agree, there's got to be some accountability at the end of the day, right? You know, here's the finished product, but how do we ensure that, you know, what becomes of it 2 years from now or 3 years from now, so that we don't put ourselves in a position of saying, you know, remember that commission that did this? You know,
whatever happened to that stuff? We should dust that off. That to me would not be a measure of success. So I really think we have to think long and hard in this next phase of how do we ensure that doesn't happen?
So three things as I kind of look at the broad perspective. I'm very sensitive to money on the table, and I'll give you an example. Maine got awarded $2 million for work on dams. And my opinion, we're struggling to put that to action. So money on the table, we can just do anything. And I think you'll find that businesses are willing to help write grants pro bono to help the state get that going. So the money on the table. The second one, actionable projects. You know, we'd like nothing more than having those successes. And the thing that really thrilled me was the stream flow gauges. It's such an easy, tangible thing. Sam Roy talked about it as well. We have lived through a period where Maine got a reduction in stream flow gauges, and it has hurt our scientific knowledge and our ability to look at the past, look at the present, and then project. So that's number two, actionable. Stream flow gauges. I'm all over that. Number three, the implementation capacity. You know, we all do planning studies either in our work, working for municipalities or as consultants or as businesses. We do planning studies. The next step is hard, putting that to implementation. So raising that road after you have determined that it gets wet repeatedly is a tough thing. So we looked at people who can design and who can build. That leads me to the third and really important issue, and that is interns. I think we all should be somehow engaging the younger generation and teaching them and mentoring them, whether it's having them work at a town, having them work for a firm or a business. It's a great way to test drive young minds and see if they're a good fit and to see if the place they're working is a good fit for them. So let's seek out those students and those interns. We've made postings and had incredible response from all across the country. So the young people are there and they're interested in science and whatever policy and other things. So those are the three items. Thanks.
I'll just add very quickly, I was thinking about Dan's question and actually thinking about public opinion. And I think we've thought a lot about municipal leaders who are among people on the front lines, but as we move into a legislative session, and I think a lot of us in the room who work in the political context think about how do we bring people from both parties who agree that this is important to some of the solutions that will be harder. I think that's kind of a collective thing that December and January might be good times to talk about all that, because I think Maine people are concerned about these issues. They feel strongly about it. So helping them sort of understand our work and the kinds of solutions that the state is thinking about and honestly needs public support for to keep moving forward. That's kind of on my mind right now. Maybe it's because the legislature is being sworn in just a couple weeks.
Echoing a lot of others, and because you said 15 minutes,
Yeah.
I'm gonna move, but capital planning is all about prioritization. You get down to it, and how do you actually do this? This is bigger than any one town, whether it's small or medium or big, it's bigger than any one town. But we're at the local control state. And so that delivery method and how you go about doing it so that it's not prescriptive, our way of the highway from a level, but whether it's the RPO or some kind of regional, you're a small or even a medium, you're looking for someone to help, but when it comes down to a capital plan, there's only so many grants you go through. The who decides thing becomes very, very relevant. So I'm kind of by nature thinking about the implementation and the how to in terms of the issues. It's a great, I think it's a totally appropriate for an interim report of where we are now. It identifies all of them. Figuring out capacity at what level, that capital planning thing, which we at DOT have tried to work towards that thing, but I can tell you, it actually comes down to a decision that says this is where we're going to put limited funds. It's bumpy sometimes. It's bumpy, and so how you go about doing that, and do you try to do something early with kind of, because you gotta show early successes, kind of like, first and kind of like get some successes with some early stuff and show that things can happen. Constantly thinking about the delivery method, because at the beginning, there will be nothing perfect. But that's what I think, how do you regionalize and not stop on local control?
Probably because I've been dealing with budgets all day, my mind revolves around the pay for, short, medium, long term, and how we're gonna prioritize. We're not gonna get everything we want. Capacity is gonna be a continued issue just for maintaining programs in state government. And now, as we talk about how we're gonna leverage going forward for what is incredibly important work. I'm not sure how we get there. I think Hannah is right? Whether it's an R or a D conversation, I think this is an issue that impacts everybody across the state. This isn't a coastal issue. This isn't an inland issue. It's an everybody issue. So I think how we figure out the conversation between now and January, when the legislature comes back, is going to be very important.
For those of you who were at the press conference earlier, does anybody remember what the question most asked was?
How much money?
How much is this going to cost? I think, obviously, our challenges are many, and there's plenty of them in the report, and I love the report. But if we're gonna meet long-term goals, and I don't think by nature we're a group that like to pat ourselves on the back, but we really have to highlight short-term successes and what we have done to date. And there's no shortage of those stories. I mean, through DMR and DECD, we've seen a lot of wharves that were destroyed be rebuilt. And those are very easy visual stories that we can tell in a report like this and show. This is where we were, this is where we are, this is what resiliency looks like. And not only that, this is what it cost. And this is what was matched. And since it's been rebuilt, this is the economic activity that has gone over this. And have that answer ready when that question is asked. Okay, well, what did that cost? Well, it cost this. Here's all the economic activity that's happened as a result. Wharves are the story that's easy from our perspective to tell, but like stream flow gauges. Here's where we put these in. Here's the amount of money it saved us proactively. Short stories like that that have big impacts can go a long ways towards building that momentum that we need to generate long-term resiliency. With that, I got to run to my daughter's first hockey practice. So I'm out the door, but thank you very much for today and everything. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Kurt.
Yeah, well.
Luck to her.
Thanks, she's gonna need
it. So a couple of things. One is, I think we do a disservice to other perils by not talking about them in the report. Yes, the storms in December and January were water-related storms, but fire, freezing, drought, which is what we're going through, wind. So I think we need to, maybe the next iteration of the report, we can start to think about that. We're always focused on the most recent disaster because of recency bias, but I do think that there are other issues we probably need to be thinking about. And the other piece that I think we don't give enough attention to is cross-agency collaboration that can occur. So I run the insurance bureau. There was a federal grant that said you, the insurance bureau, is the only one who can apply for this grant. It was not a grant that I really could use, but OHIM, the health insurance marketplace, could use it. So I said, well, I'll apply for it. I'll get the money and I'll give it to you. And I'm sure there's things like that that go on at the state level, but I think that, and that I think can help communities as well. So if there's a DMR grant that also has a DOT hook, or another agency, working together to make it easier for municipalities and communities. And I lived in a little town. I still live in a little town, but it's not small, it's just small. So I get that there are extremely small communities that could never imagine applying for a grant. And we shouldn't ignore them or not ignore them, but we should be mindful of those communities because there are lots of them in Maine. But I think it's a great report. I think you guys did a fantastic job.
Thanks. I look at this, of course, from the perspective of philanthropy. And I see a lot that probably is pretty actionable for us. And I don't know. So for example, some of the supporting capacity, like around technical assistance, you know, philanthropy could support a bunch of grant writers. That's something we could do very easily. We could top off to extend the reach of existing public programs. I think about the communities resilience grants, for example, get to many towns, but not nearly enough. Can we extend that? Can we really incentivize a regional approach and provide some resources there to get a regional look? So obviously for philanthropy, and maybe that's some of our early wins, in fact, because philanthropy can't do the big stuff. But we can work fast and we can be flexible. But you know, something like helping to draw down the big dollars, I think is something we could really support. And then I guess following on a little bit what you're saying, Hannah, but a little bit different is, it just seems to me we have to have community buy-in for the sustainability of the work. We have to have community support this work. And I know that's hard and I don't quite know how to do it, but again, I think that's something else philanthropy could support. I know it's a long game, but we have to have support in the legislature or wherever else it is. So those are my thoughts.
I guess I was thinking back a little bit to how we can continue this and make sure all the work that we've done isn't just a one and done report. And, you know, I'm sure Gov has been thinking a lot about this, but integration with the Maine Climate Council work, which is, you know, short, intermediate and long-term goals, to me really makes a lot of sense in terms of trying to think about integrating the commission's work with that. And I think one thing that'd be very useful for us over the next 6 months, and it's probably on the list of things already to do, but our recommendations, it was been said a couple of times by the panelists, you know, very good 30,000 foot look at things. We're gonna have to get more specific and down in the weeds on our recommendations. And there are some sub-recommendations in there, but I think what would be very useful is starting to assign what organizations, whether it's philanthropic, whether it's a state agency, whether it's other NGO that's out there or other bodies that are gonna be assigned some of the tasks to get these things. It's something we did with the resilience working group for the Maine Climate Council. It was really useful to kind of identify who was actually gonna be doing what. So I think that's gonna be a big next step that we might need to focus on for the next.
So we have a couple more commission members at the table. Jim, Shiloh, you want to close this out? I'm not sure, Brian, how many people are online? Do we have commission members
I
online
think
as well?
just Sam.
Sam Roy, and he left a comment.
Okay. Sam, do you want to speak that comment? Are you still with us?
I think he said he can't.
Okay,
He's driving, so
okay.
anyway, Jim was about to speak.
Go for it, Jim.
Like I said, I'm just very optimistic at this point. There's a lot there and there's a lot of work ahead. And maintaining that continuity into the future. And like Charlie was saying, stay on top of it as it evolves and develops.
So you're volunteering with Charlie to stay on this commission for life.
For the rest of your lives.
Yeah, I knew that was gonna come.
Good job, Charlie.
I think to Dan's question about how do we get buy-in, how do we, get that from the communities, whether small, very small, whatever. I think outreach is going to be big here because I don't know how many of those small and very small communities have any idea we even exist. So to think that they are going to buy into the report that they don't even know about, I think that whether through the COGS, whether through Maine Municipal Association, and maybe through a combination of that, talking with the legislators, just getting the word out that this is what we're working towards, that these are the reasons we're working towards it, that those communications, because this very small communities don't even have the capacity to reach out to find out what they don't know. So it's got to be from the kind of the top down, getting that word out.
Something, Dan, closing this part of the.
Well, I will, first of all, thank you all for, for your comments. I think this is exactly the type of process we're gonna sort of dive into in the next few months to come up, everything has to be actionable. And, I think we are not stumbling, we are acknowledging something, a number of things that we've always acknowledged that, we've done the sort of the 64,000 foot look. Now we have to get down to what makes it really happen. And we're gonna have to discuss some things that are pretty uncomfortable. Like that question that we were asked by the media, what's it all gonna cost? If we don't address that, and I don't think we're gonna come up, I don't think it's this committee's purpose to come up with a list of individual discrete projects. I think we have to come up with the game plan and a credible acknowledgement of what it will take to implement that game plan. And probably an infrastructure whereby sort of the individual things comes up from the communities and not from us, because we all know that if we go and say, no, you gotta build roads differently, or you gotta, do your wharfs a particular way, the first thing is gonna be, no, we don't do it that way. That's not the way we do it in this town. So we've got to figure out a common language. So it's been really helpful to be able to, kind of frame around, not what's missing, but what's next. I did want to, before I close out and turn it over to you to close the meeting, just wanted to ask if Sam Brody, who's on the phone, Sam, are you able to hear us? Sam's our
I can hear you.
Consultant, who's been helping us, who's kind of the brainchild of these kind of reports in a number of other states, and has been extremely helpful. I just wanted to, Sam, if you had any things you wanted to chime in on. The one thing that I take some level of, not pride, because it wasn't me and it wasn't this commission, but confidence in it is Sam knowing the landscape of the country. This is either really good for us or really bad for the rest of the country, but has said that we are, at least to some degree, light years ahead of what other states are doing in terms of the commission acknowledging the issues. So maybe we'll have an influx of residents that can help pay for some of this if they think we're gonna be able to be a better place for them to preserve their real estate values. Anyway, Sam, is there anything you'd like to add on reflection?
Yeah, first, thanks to everyone. Kudos to Brian, Hannah, and that whole team for amazing work. On my end, Basilia and Dr. Highfield have really helped put together a product. As I'm listening to everyone is very positive on the recommendations. I think it's partially because we really listened to you. We heard everyone out individually, and I think, thanks, Brian, was able to really garner everybody's thoughts and integrate it into this report. I also agree with some of these comments about implementation. The next 6 months, the degree to which you all can think about implementation, which means accountability, cost, timing, and monitoring, which in itself costs money. And to add to that, potentially a process or selection criteria to articulate why you would choose one project over another. Going back to my national experience, that turned out to be a big deal. Project selection, because you're right, no matter how much money you have, whether it's millions or billions, decisions have to be made, and articulating why, when, and where those decisions are made when resources come, I think is really important. And then someone said, keep the commission in place. And that's really resonated with me. You all are at the forefront of resiliency already, and this report kind of nails it home. And I think my hope is this is great for Maine and not so great for the rest of the country. But I really do think that if this is advertised correctly, other states are going to be looking towards you as leaders. And this report is the first step in doing that. The commission is a great way for you to formally and informally bridge the silos, synergize among yourself. And I know there'll be another storm event in the future. So rather than restarting somebody to deal with these issues, and it could be drought or frost the next time around, having a body that's not too formal, but is in communication would be immensely helpful. And that alone will set you apart. How many other states can do that and know each other by name and sit around a table? That alone is going to take you where other states are failing along the lines of resiliency. So that's just a few comments. And again, thank you for allowing me to be part of this process and engage with the place I call my homeland. And hope to see you all soon in person. Sooner is better. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Linda, you want to close us out?
Thank you, Sam. We're gonna be hearing a lot more from Sam over the next 6 months. We're gonna get an assessment of federal funding opportunities that Maine should be utilizing, an analysis of the data on risk that is available in Maine and what it tells us about where risk is. So this is no parting of the ways, as Sam said. We're gonna see each other soon, and the sooner the better. We are running right up to the end of our time here together. I want to thank all of you for this amazing work today. I heard Joe say that the hard part is yet to come. That's what I heard. And it's true, because I do a lot of comprehensive planning, both with my town and with nonprofit organizations, right? And too often that plan sits somewhere and is never implemented and never actionalized. And it's the one thing I work with my clients the most on. Is like, oh no, I'm not going to work on a plan with you that is not implemented. It has to be actionable. You have to do it. So what I hear is momentum of this group and of how impressive this group is. We just heard from Sam. I heard about implementation and about accountability. And so I want to close us with those 3 ideas to hold until our next meeting, to think about what that means in terms of the specifics now that come out of these 12 priority areas, the specific plans that come and how we prioritize them, including the process of how we prioritize them. Who do we talk to? How do we get the information from the ground up, right? The process of how we do that is going to be super, super important. All right, so we're shifting to a monthly meeting cycle starting next month. Maggie's going to send you out the calendar holds, our upcoming meeting dates for December 19th, January 22nd, February 13th. You don't have to write this fast. March 19th, April 10th, May 7th, she'll send them out. Our final report is due in 6 months on May 15th. So we have put so much effort into this. Excuse me. We want to finish strong. So please stay engaged. Please stay connected. We have the hard part yet to come. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.